Well, welcome to the KPW podcast and Happy New Year. My name is KPW, and today we're very excited to be having Marshall Garvey, an author based in Southern California. And he's written or co-written three books, and we're going to talk to him today about one of them. And hopefully, we'll have Marshall back with us for another appearance. But Marshall, welcome. Happy New Year. How are you doing?
Doing great. Happy New Year as well. One clarification. I'm actually currently residing in the Sacramento area. I am from Southern California, though. Big time Dodgers fan, as KP knows. Hope to move to Southern California at some point in the near future. But yeah, I'm doing well and really grateful to be here.
Excellent. Well, we're gonna start with you've written or co-written three books, Marshall, and that is quite an accomplishment, to be sure. The first book that you wrote, I believe it took 5 years of research and writing and editing. It's titled "The Hidden History of Sacramento Baseball," and also you've written or co-written with J.D. Weaver a novel, I guess fiction,
Mhm.
Elwood's Odyssey. And very exciting news coming up in spring of this year, 2025, Interstate 85, a book about the 1985 World Series between the Kansas City Royals and St. Louis Cardinals. Wow. So all three books are different types, basically. So why don't we get started with, what got you interested in writing? Like, how did that come about?
Well, that's a great question. Writing for me is a proclivity that started right around 2002, 2003 while I was in middle school. I originally cut my teeth as a movie critic. Like I just like to go to the movies and watch classic movies and write, reviews of them on various websites. That's really where it started, and I just kept honing that craft throughout the years, expanding my reach, writing about movies, and then I started writing about music, and I start writing about video games, start writing about sports, especially baseball, start writing about, excuse me, about writing about history, and just kept honing that craft until 2014, the year that I graduated from UC Davis. I'd say just about 2 weeks before my diploma ceremony, I was hired by the Sacramento Historical Society to work on a book about the history of baseball in Sacramento. So that kicked things up a notch to me now pursuing life as a book author as well. So that's the super Cliff Notes version, but I'd say yeah, that's the start of it.
That's quite interesting, Marshall, because you started out writing like movie reviews, and that's a big change into sports. That were you always a baseball fan?
Oh yes. Oh, I've been a baseball fan since 2000. Most of my life. Second generation Dodgers fan. For anyone wondering, I'm not related to Steve Garvey, but we still get asked that. Me and my family are asked all the time. But I've actually found that even though these are distinctly different subjects that I'm interested in, I become a better writer writing about all of them. I've found that if I develop a certain skill writing about movies, maybe that skill will translate into writing about baseball. It actually all kind of gels together in the end, which I really like.
I understand you're a Dodger fan now, but were you not a Twins fan growing up, or did I misread
I
that?
oh no, yeah, I know I was really big on the Twins. That's a long story in of itself. Yeah, I really liked the Twins as a kid. I really liked like Torrey Hunter, Doug Mankiewicz, players like that in the 2000s. I really ultimately just kind of went all in and focused on my Dodger fanhood. They've always been my NL team. Now I just kind of focus on them. But the I would say growing up a Twins fan helped me focus and appreciate on Midwest baseball, which I think that helped set up the 85 book, but we'll get to that later.
Definitely. So the hidden history of Sacramento baseball. So I understand that, of course, you were approached, or the idea was planted in your head. It didn't come from you originally to pursue writing this book. So, can you touch on that a little bit?
Yes. Yeah, I was hired by, like I said, the Sacramento Historical Society, brought on as an intern to write it for the Historical Society by a guy named Greg Velm. And I also received help from Alan O'Connor, who's an esteemed baseball historian here in Sacramento. Ultimately, the society agreed to just let me do the book for my own sake, like not on behalf of the society. So it just became a personal thing. Yeah, and that started in 2014, and I self-published the book in November 2019. And I just basically my thesis for the book is that Sacramento is overlooked as a great baseball city because we've never had a major league team. You know, all the other major cities and areas in California basically had major league teams, but Sacramento has been really at the forefront of baseball's evolution in California since the mid 19th century. So I drew on like prior books, like including Alan O'Connor's book Gold on the Diamond or John Spalding's brilliant book Sacramento Senators and Solons, and I just you know detailed the basic history of all the teams in Sacramento's past, like the Altas, of course, the Solons of the Pacific Coast League, and wrote about the River Cats as well, of course, the team that's there now. And I also did a chapter about 50 notable players who are either from Sacramento or played here, and that's a really esteemed list. That includes like Dusty Baker, Steve Sachs, Brad Lidge, Barry Zito, R.J. Reynolds, lots of Dodgers, lots of Sacramento bred Dodgers, that's for sure. So yeah, that's and I continue to do speeches and like separate articles about Sacramento baseball history. And now that the Athletics are going to play in Sacramento and we will have MLB here, I guess and all people will appreciate our city all the more.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. With of course, a sad state in Oakland, but definitely exciting in Sacramento to get the A's. What for 2, 3 seasons? Is that right?
3 seasons, at least that's the plan for now.
Now, yeah, like when you the title of this first book by Marshall Garvey again is The Hidden History of Sacramento Baseball. And it is a history of Sacramento baseball because you cover, from the early eras, through the 1930s, 40s, and all the way to modern times. So was it more difficult to find the materials of the early years? Like, how did you approach that? I assume you had a lot of support in that regard.
Oh, I definitely did. Well, like Alan provided some really cool, rare photos for one. Finding materials wasn't too hard because there are good, like public newspaper archives. And again, there were prior books written about Sacramento baseball. Like I mentioned, John Spalding's book. Like I used that pretty heavily. The challenge wasn't really finding material. It was sifting through factual errors because I am conditioned more as a major league historian. This was really challenging for me getting into minor league history, which wasn't really as much my strong suit. So I found some mistakes in the book and ultimately was able to correct them. But I learned that minor league history can be filled with a lot, like newspaper accounts from back in the day can be filled with a lot of tall tales and fallacies. And yeah, that was the main challenge. But putting the info together wasn't too hard because I think even though it's a long a span of time and that includes a bunch of different teams, the overall arc of history of baseball's history in Sacramento, I thought was pretty compelling the way it unfolded.
That's great. And are you able to share any examples of like factual errors that you uncovered?
There was, yeah, I caught a few errors, and this was one of the great things about I self-published this book through Amazon KDP, so I was able to go back and just correct them. I can't remember the exact ones. There was just like maybe like some differing accounts of a certain game or I think there was this kind of Black Sox-esque scandal. I think I there was some mistakes or some misinformation about certain players that were caught up in it, so I had to go back and correct that. Yeah, again, that was a little while ago, but I was able to address that, and certainly from here now, I do my best to be as factually accurate as possible in my work, but whenever I write about minor league baseball again, I'll be even more more vigilant.
Absolutely. Now I know because I've read your posts from Facebook and I appreciate you sharing a lot of information on there. And I know that from for the third book, Interstate 85, which is coming or which is going to be released this spring, 2025, you actually interviewed quite a lot of players involved in the 85 World Series. That was great. Now, for the hidden history of Sacramento baseball, were you able to get a lot of interviews with the players who were from the Sacramento area? You mentioned a list of them at the beginning, whether it was Barry Zito and other Dusty Baker and so on. Or was it more to do with like research? Were you able to get interviews from with some of these players?
I did not do any player interviews for the first book, and I thought about that at the time. It really was just more research based. And again, I was just a young author starting out. I think the way the book unfolded, it could obviously could have benefited from more interviews. I did conduct one interview. In 2014, I interviewed Dan Vistica, who was an executive with the River Cats at the time. He's long since left the team. I think he's down in San Diego these days. But yeah, I interviewed, excuse me, Dan Vistica in his office, and that really shaped the River Cats chapter. And that was a really nice talk with him. But that, yeah, I have thought it would be nice to do, excuse me, more interviews with Sacramento baseball legends. Maybe that could be a project down the line. Um, but I will say that that experience with Dan Visticella, it did lay the foundation for me to do all the interviews later. But we'll get to those when we get to Interstate proper.
Excellent. Yeah. Now, in terms of some of the more fascinating stories in Sacramento baseball history, I'm gonna put you on the spot. But which piece of information or tidbit, I guess, surprised you the most when you actually did the research for this first book?
Um, that is such a great question because there's quite a few. Um, one tidbit was one of my favorite parts was I wrote about the 70s Solon. So to clarify, for the long from 1903 to 1960, there was the Sacramento Solons of they were part of that golden age of the Pacific Coast League, which included like the Oakland Oaks, the Los Angeles Angels, the San Francisco Seals. That Solon's franchise moved to Hawaii to become the Islanders in 1961. And Sacramento was left without any pro baseball. Like no major league team came to town, no other minor league team came and filled their place. Their stadium, Edmonds Field, was demolished just a few years later. But in the mid 70s, we got a second Solons franchise. The Eugene Emeralds, a team in Oregon, were purchased by Bob Piccinini, the founder of Save Mart Supermarkets, and he moved them down here. They were just renamed the Solons, and they played in Hughes Stadium, which is Sacramento City College's football field, and it was just a total disaster. It was like when the Dodgers played at the Coliseum. You had that truncated left field. So you're talking about favorite tidbits, just a lot of the weird stories of those 70s Solons, like the pitchers had ERAs in like the double digits. The best ERA would be like a guy with like a 5.58 ERA because they just gave up home runs all the time. There was one season where they wore shorts like those god awful 1976 White Sox shorts. They were just kind of this weird curiosity. And they actually did have some good players though. In 1976, uh, at first they were really bad because they were not treated well by their major league affiliate, the Milwaukee Brewers. But then the Texas Rangers became their affiliate and they started to get better. They had some really solid players like Greg Pryor, future 85 Royal, Len Barker, who went on to pitch a perfect game in the majors. But they could never secure a new stadium, so they got moved, and that was that until the River Cats came along in 2000. I know it was a bit of a run-on answer, but I would say the 70 Solons has like so many weird, funny tidbits that I thought were really entertaining, and that's one of my favorite parts of my book.
That's excellent, Marshall. Again, we're talking to Marshall Garvey, an author of three books, and we're talking specifically right now about the hidden history of Sacramento baseball. Now, this first book you mentioned, you self-published on Amazon, and of course, your most current or the book that's going to be released this year is published with a major publisher. So I guess a question I want to ask is, you've worked with a major publisher now, and you've done self-publishing. Now, when you publish this first book, there were no, I guess, no rules, no restrictions and anything. How did you figure out or decide what information you're gonna cut? And because a traditional publisher is gonna say, "Oh, you have way too much information. You gotta cut this and this and this and this out." Like as you were writing this first book, The Hidden History of Sacramento Baseball, did you have that kind of like, I guess, pressure or anything like that where you figure, oh, I need to cut this part out, otherwise the book will run too many pages? Did you have any challenges like that? How did you overcome that?
Now that is so funny you asked that because that's exactly the challenge I had with Interstate. Tons of information had to get cut, had to learn to let go of this, trim that. If my memory serves me right, this was 5 years ago. Um, I don't think I really had that problem with Hidden History of Sacramento Baseball because it's really not that long. It's give me a moment here. I got a copy myself here. It's oh wow, it I don't it technically barely even just surpasses the 200 page mark. So it's not too long. It's just a basic introductory kind of book, both for myself as an author and for anyone just wanting to start to learn about Sacramento baseball history. So I'm not saying I didn't have any challenges writing, of course I did, but like in terms of cutting content, that really wasn't an issue. So that was pretty manageable in that regard, at least.
Now, was there any point, because writing a book can be well, it is a long process. You're kind of in a sense by yourself, and was there any point where you thought this was, not fun for me? I would like to give up, or was it just, you had the drive to see this all the way through? Like, what was it like for you in that sense?
Um, it was definitely challenging, because it took me 5 years, and again, it was my first book, so I don't think I ever really had a feeling that I wanted to give up. I just had to really go through certain things in my life and get my writing career, my life situated. I actually became a full-time remote writer midway through 2019. So that really helped give me the time and foundation to finish it once and for all. Yeah, I don't think I ever really felt like I was going to give up on it. You know, I'm a goal-oriented guy, and the I talked the book up for a while and I knew I had to finish it. So yeah, there are definitely some growing pains as an author and lessons, but yeah, I never really felt like giving up on it. So I'm glad I saw it through.
And in terms of a writer, like, have you, because time has passed, and have you changed your, I guess, your um, habits in terms of your daily writing goals or habits from that time to now? Because I know, like, for some writers, they have spent, let's say, at least 1 hour working on their writing every day, or they need to have like some caffeine with them, or they have to work at Starbucks or at the library or somewhere. Like for you, what was that like? Has it changed since then?
That is such a great question. Is yeah, you do. I would say like every writer has their habits, and I would say that when you write a book, that might modify your habits or solidify certain ones. Um, I'm a real night owl. That's one of my main habits as a writer. I'm actually looking to change that now. Um, that was a real habit, I think, that was cemented by finishing this book and being able to be a full-time remote writer. Um, Night owl was a big thing. Yeah, like you mentioned, going to Starbucks. Yeah, and that's something I kept up with Interstate too. Like, it's not that I would do every writing session away from home, but every now and then I'd be like, I need like a little change of scenery. Like, I'm gonna go to my favorite coffee shop, or I'll go to Buffalo Wild Wings and just kind of pig out and just have a different atmosphere to get it done. So yeah, I'd say Hidden History did get some of those habits in my mind, and I've stayed with them. Also, I do write regularly. I still work as a full-time remote writer now, so I writing daily is a habit. Um, yeah, I would say yeah, staying up late, writing every day, and mixing it up by at a coffee shop or restaurant are habits that I definitely cemented working on this first book.
Again, we're speaking with Marshall Garvey, who's written or co-written three books, including The Hidden History of Sacramento Baseball. Now, I'm curious to know that because your first book is about Sacramento baseball history, and then you went on to co-write fiction with an author named J.D. Weaver, and then the third book is Interstate 85, the World Series in 1985 between the Kansas City Royals and the St. Louis Cardinals. So it's actually different genres, if you will. So did you plan that, or like how did you think, okay, I'm going to write about the history of baseball in this town and going to now do fiction, now going to do like a World Series between these two major league teams. Like how did you transition yourself into these different books and are you going to have a fourth, fifth project coming and what are they going to be about?
Well, first, as far as I did not absolutely, part of what I love about and what I'm so proud about these three books so far is that they were not, none of them were really pre-planned or predetermined. They all happened pretty organically. One thing I'll say, just I will be taking, because I wrote all these books in succession, and I've just got some other things to focus on in life. I won't be writing my fourth book for a while, but I do have a lot of ideas for it. Um, but yeah, there really was no preset plan. Although the funny thing is, these three books all basically happened in rapid succession. As soon as I had published, self-published Hidden History of Sacramento Baseball, J.D. Weaver, a good friend of my family, it's particularly close to my godparents, Peggy and Chuck, started seeking me out because he had an idea for a novel. And he had conceived this novel before I was even born. It was his lifetime dream project. And eventually we touched base. He told me about it. He wanted it to be based on the Korean War. And he agreed to pay me to write it. And sure enough, quarantine happened, and I really needed the stable income. So yeah, that's how Elwood happened. And then probably just a couple months after I start writing Elwood with JD Weaver, one month into lockdown specifically, I came up with the idea for Interstate 85. So these three books weren't necessarily predetermined, like, oh, well, this is going to be my next project after this, but they all came to fruition rapidly after one another. So it's wild how that happens.
And I will spend time, hopefully in another episode on on these two other books later on, and in particular the Interstate 85. I think is interesting in the sense that you grew up a Twins fan, and of course you love the Dodgers, but then the third book is about the Kansas City Royals championship season. So that'll be quite fascinating. I think you kind of revealed some of that on Facebook. But if you want to touch on this, that's great. Well, we could save that for a later episode. But what's the cheat sheet version behind Interstate 85, if you don't mind sharing?
Oh, it's of course not. No, well, so the thing with Interstate 85 was my friend Jonathan Daniel at the time he was working on, he eventually published a book about the 1982 World Series between the Cardinals and Milwaukee Brewers. The book's called Sud Series. And I had that in mind. It's April 15th, 2020. Again, lockdown, I'm masked up, doing my daily run late in the afternoon, and I'm thinking about Jonathan having written about the 82 World Series. And I just get on this train of thought, and I suddenly thought about 85. And it's just like when it just like fireworks went off in my mind. I was like, wait a minute. No one has written about 85 like in a really serious way. So I just kind of kept doing my jog, thinking about all these different storylines, that I knew at the time. Came up with the book's title that very day, Interstate 85, the nice little portmanteau, and then just spent the rest of the year developing and researching it. And I just found like, oh man, there's so many great and overlooked stories because when people talk about the 85 series, they always just focus on Don Dankinger's infamous missed call in game six, but there was way more to it than that. So the Cliff Notes is, yeah, I just kept researching and finding a lot more interesting stories and eventually started conducting interviews and it led to a really magnificent book that I'm very proud of.
And that's great. The Did the first two books help you to secure the interviews that you needed for Interstate 85, or how did you manage to secure interviews with many of the players involved in that World Series?
Um, that is a terrific question. Because I got 27 interviews with players. I got Don Denkinger himself. I got like family members. Even interviewed a Royals bat boy from the time. I interviewed a pretty wide variety of people. Obviously, I'd like to think like, yeah, I've established credibility as a writer by that time, but I think the main reason a lot of people were so excited to talk was because the 85 series was so long forgotten and overlooked that they probably didn't get asked much about it, especially for a major book. And so I think it was pretty easy. I would just ask them and they would be totally willing to do it. I mean, I got George Brett to talk. He was excited to do it. It wasn't like a big hassle to get George Brett. He was like, yeah, give him my I asked the Kansas City Sports Journal, I was like, hey, would George be willing to talk? And Brett was just like, give him my number. So I think there was a well, I think a lot of these people talk just for the enthusiasm, a chance to tell their story in a big way. And I'm glad that they all talked.
That's fantastic. And I just want to share a little anecdote myself because I recently wrote a book about baseball card players, or it's called Baseball Card Heroes. And I got a chance to talk to Mark Gubazar, who was a member of the 85 Royals, and he was, yeah, totally excited to talk to me about this book. I only talked to one KC Royal, Gubiza, and yeah, he was very open and talked about a little bit about the 85 World Series with me. And yeah, it's a lot of fascinating things like you alluded to that, are forgotten or overlooked. And I had a great chat. And incidentally, I wrote a book about the 88 Dodgers, which you know about. And for a
Mhm.
lot of the interviews, Fred Claire, the GM at the time of the 88 Dodgers, he set me up with a lot of the members of the team, and I was able to get access that way. But so I did get help with the 88 Dodger book, and I just wanted to kind of wondered about your 85, um, Interstate 85, and just kind of see how. But it's great that it worked out, and glad that many people were excited to talk to you. That's great.
It was, and that's part of what made it such a joy to write. And I'm glad you brought up Mark Gubizah. He was my second interview. He's very special to me, and yeah, he's super enthusiastic. He's such a great storyteller, of course, because he's, an announcer for the Angels. So his ability to paint a scene, I was really impressed by. But yeah, that's cool. And of course, yeah, yeah, for all of your listeners, of course, yeah, reviewed your book about the 88 Dodgers back when I wrote for Dodgers Nation. That was back in 2019. So I have really vivid memories of reading your book, and I was impressed at how you. I think I mentioned in the review the way you focused on more overlooked guys like the stuntmen, Danny Heap and Mickey Hatcher. Yeah, you did a good job with that.
Well, thanks, Marshall. I want to switch to the next topic, which is like, advice for um, aspiring authors. Because I know you mentioned J.D. Weaver was like a family friend who, approached you after you've written The Hidden History of Sacramento Baseball. I don't know if, people might come up to you and ask for advice. What would you tell somebody who would like to be an author?
Well, there's a lot that I would like to tell, and I figure I'll definitely get asked a lot now with Interstate out. My first point of advice for anyone who wants to be an author is make sure whatever kind of book you're writing, make sure, like, be honest with yourself that your heart is 100% in it. Your passion for writing this book is just immeasurable because writing a book is hard. It's a lot harder than people might realize. And again, especially with this book, Interstate was the most challenging of all. It took 4 years, lots of ups and downs, and lots of lessons to be learned, and also the fact that when you write a book, there's going to be a lot of stages to it. You don't just write it. There's going to be lots of edits, fact checking, proofreading. There may be other components like gathering photos, or if your publisher requires it, like interview release forms or what have you. But if but just to circle back to the main point, if your passion for your project is pure and it's exceptional and it means a lot to you, you will get through all of that and you'll be proud of yourself. That's one big piece of advice that I have for aspiring authors.
That's fantastic, Marshall. And again, Marshall Garvey, an author. You can check out his books on Amazon as well as other online bookstores. First book, The Hidden History of Sacramento Baseball, is also co-written with J.D. Weaver, L. Wood's Odyssey, and finally Interstate 85 to be released in the spring of 2025. So how can readers and listeners keep up with the latest happenings, Marshall?
Um, well, you can go to my website, marshallpgarvey.com. Also check out my Substack, Martial Arts, as in my name, Martial Arts. It's a pun I'm pretty proud of, and sign up for a free subscription to my Substack. And also to seek me out on social media. I'm on Twitter, simple handle at Marshall Garvey. And also, you can find me on Facebook. I network, obviously, you and I reconnected there, and I've networked with a lot of other baseball people there. So, yeah, just head to my official website, my Substack, seek me out on social media, and I'm always glad to connect and talk with anyone.
Fantastic. So thank you, Marshall Garvey, for the time. And hopefully we'll have you back on again for a second or subsequent episode. But again, be sure to check out Marshall Garvey and best of success with all three books and Interstate 85 to be released in spring 2025. Keep it up. And we know you mentioned the fourth book won't be coming for a while, but well, I wish you all the success with these three books and your future writing endeavors.
Thank you so much.